My name is Ingrid Bergstrom, and I am 60 years old, and 7 weeks ago, on the last Tuesday in August, my mother died in the four-poster bed in the front bedroom of the farmhouse in Pine River, Minnesota, where she had been born in 1938, with my right hand under her left hand and the morning light coming in through the window, the way it had been coming in through that window for almost 100 years. She had been quiet for 2 days by then. The hospice nurse had told me on the Saturday afternoon that we were probably looking at the inside of a week. We had not, in the event, needed the week. My mother, Astrid Bergstrom, had been a careful, economical woman her entire life, and she had been the kind of careful and economical woman in her dying as well. She had gone, in the end, on a Tuesday morning at 6:41, and she had not made me wait. I sat with her for almost 2 hours afterward before I called anybody. I had earned those 2 hours. I had earned them across 4 years of moving back into her house and 7 years of watching her go from a woman who could still keep her own household ledger and pencil at the kitchen table to a woman who could not, in the last 6 months, reliably name me when I walked into her room in the morning. 4 years of full-time live-in care. 7 years of decline. By any honest measure I have available, 4 years of my life given over, completely, to keeping my mother in the only house she had ever wanted to die in. I had not minded. I want to say that plainly, because the rest of this account is going to read more darkly if I do not. I did not mind the 4 years. The 4 years had, in their slow, exhausting way, been the closest I'd been to my mother since I was 9 years old. The 4 years had been a gift. The fact that the 4 years were a gift is the thing my brother, 4 months earlier, on a Thursday afternoon in mid-July, had decided to take away from me. Before I go any further, I want to ask you, if you have not yet, to subscribe to this channel, because the account I am about to give you is not a short one, and I would like to know there are people in the room with me as I tell it. Leave me a comment, please, and tell me where you are listening from. There is a particular kind of listener for the kind of story I am about to tell, which is the listener who has herself spent years caring for an aging parent and has come, in those years, to understand that the labor of that care is essentially invisible to everyone who is not doing it, and that the moment the parent is gone, the invisible labor is most often paid out in the small, careful currencies of inheritance to the people who did not do the work. If you are one of those listeners, this account is for you. Stay with me to the end. There is, at the end, a piece of information I want you to have, in case it ever turns out to be useful. I want to tell you about my mother, because in order to understand what my brother Soren did, you have to understand what he was preparing to take from me. And what he was preparing to take from me was not, in the most important sense, money. It was the meaning of 4 years of my life. Astrid Bergstrom was born in the farmhouse on the gravel road 3 miles south of Pine River, Minnesota, in November of 1938, to a family of Swedish immigrants who had come over to the upper Midwest in the 1890s and had carved out, across 3 generations, the small, steady kind of farm that does not produce wealth, but does produce a particular kind of person, which is a person who knows the value of a thing because she has handled it twice. My mother was that kind of person. She had married my father, Halvar Bergstrom, in 1961, in the small Lutheran church on the corner of First and Birch in Pine River. She had had my brother Soren in 1962, my sister Linnea in 1968, and me in 1965, in the order eldest, middle, youngest. Although Linnea has insisted for almost 6 decades that she is technically the second daughter rather than the youngest daughter, on grounds that I have never been able to follow. My father was a high school math teacher in Pine River for 31 years before his retirement, and was, in 2003, killed by a heart attack at the kitchen table at the age of 68, leaving my mother widowed at 64. She lived alone in the farmhouse for the next 16 years, the way many Lutheran widows of her generation lived alone, which is to say, with a great deal of competence and very few requests for help. The diagnosis came in 2018, when she was 80. The neurologist at the regional hospital in Bemidji used the word probably. The word probably became the word definitely by 2019. The word definitely became, by 2021, the slow daily watching of a woman I had loved my entire life forget where she had set down her coffee cup, and then where the coffee cup itself was kept, and then what coffee was for, in that order, across 30 months. I moved into the farmhouse in October of 2021 after a Saturday morning telephone call from her next-door neighbor, Marjorie Polson, who is the only adult in this account other than me whose name you need to remember. Marjorie had found my mother that morning at 6 a.m, standing in the gravel of the driveway in her nightdress and one slipper, looking at the silo of the neighboring farm and trying, very calmly, to figure out how she had gotten there. Marjorie had walked her back to the kitchen. Marjorie had made her coffee. Marjorie had called me. I had been retired from the high school in Brainerd, where I had taught studio art for 26 years, for 14 months by then. I had been living in a one-bedroom apartment in Brainerd that I had moved into after my divorce in 2017, 80 miles from my mother. I had been driving up to Pine River every other Sunday across those 14 months to spend the afternoon. The 14 months had become, by Marjorie's phone call, an arrangement that was no longer sufficient. I packed my apartment that afternoon. I drove up the following Tuesday with a U-Haul. I had been living in the farmhouse ever since. I want to be careful here about how I describe the 4 years of care, because I am aware that there is a kind of caregiver who builds her entire identity on the heroism of the caregiving, and I do not want to be that woman in this account. I was not heroic. I was, instead, the available daughter. My brother Soren lived in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, 3 hours away, running a regional wholesale operation for agricultural equipment that he could not, on his own account, leave for more than a long weekend. My sister Linnea lived in Phoenix, Arizona, where she had moved in 1994 to attend medical school and where she had remained, becoming a dermatologist with a successful aesthetic practice, marrying a software executive named Trent Vance, having 2 children who are now in their 20s, and constructing a life that did not, in any practical week of any practical year, permit her to drive 96 miles up Highway 371 to Pine River, Minnesota, with any regularity. She came home twice a year, for 4 days at Christmas and 4 days in the second week of July. She brought gifts. She made our mother laugh. She left. Soren came up perhaps once every 6 weeks. He brought his second wife, Karen, who is a hospital administrator and who had been very kind to our mother across the years of the diagnosis. He brought small, practical gifts. He stayed a Saturday afternoon. He left. Neither of them, across the 4 years I lived in the farmhouse, had spent a single night in the front bedroom on a difficult night, when my mother had gone to the bathroom 3 times between 2 in the morning and 4:30 and had needed help with each one, and had not, on the third one, recognized that the woman helping her was her own daughter. Neither of them had bathed her. Neither of them had cooked her dinner on the nights she would eat dinner, which had been declining nights across the last 18 months. Neither of them had read aloud to her in the long, quiet afternoons of last spring, when reading aloud had become the only activity that made her face do the small, recognizing thing it had begun to do less and less often. The 4 years had been mine. The 4 years had been mine because I had been the available one. The fact that I had been the available one was, by Soren's working theory of our family, the small, permanent verdict on the 4 years. The 4 years did not count, by Soren's working theory, because anybody could have done them. And I had been the one with nothing else going on. And the absence of competing demands on my time was, by his account, the reason I had been put on the 4 years, rather than any active choice I had made. I want you to understand this part, because the part that is coming requires it. Soren had decided, very privately, in some part of himself I have only recently been able to perceive, that the 4 years had been my hobby. He had decided that I had not lost anything by giving them, because I had not had anything else to give. He had decided that my life, in retirement, had been small and slow and essentially recreational, and that taking care of our mother had been the slightly more demanding version of the recreational life I had already been living. I had not, until the events of July of this year, fully understood that he had decided this. I had understood it in pieces. I had understood it, for instance, in 2023, when he had been visiting on a Sunday afternoon and had asked me, in the careful, warm voice he uses when he is delivering an opinion he wants to seem like a question, whether I thought maybe a part-time job would be good for me. Because, he said, retirement could be isolating. I had been, on the morning he had asked me that question, 14 hours into the second consecutive 20-hour day of caring for our mother through a urinary tract infection that had spiked her confusion into a state that could not, by then, be safe left alone. I had been, by the standards of any working employee in the state of Minnesota, 8 hours past the legal limit of a single shift. I had said, very carefully, to my brother, that I appreciated the suggestion and that I would think about it. He had said, very warmly, that he just worried about me and that he wanted to make sure I was getting out enough. I had not, in that exchange, allowed myself to understand what he was actually saying. I have, in the last 2 months, understood it. He had not been suggesting a part-time job to enrich my life. He had been quietly establishing, in front of his wife and in front of any future third party who might be asked about it, that my full-time presence in our mother's house was a decision I had been making for myself, and not a labor I had been performing on behalf of the family. He had been laying down a record. The record was going to matter in 14 months, when he sat down at a notary's office in Park Rapids and signed a new will on behalf of a woman who could no longer hold a pen. My mother died on the last Tuesday of August. The funeral was the following Saturday in the small Lutheran church on First and Birch in Pine River, the same church where she had been married 63 years earlier. The pastor, a soft-spoken woman in her 40s named Reverend Jensen, gave a kind eulogy. My sister Linnea flew in from Phoenix with her husband Trent and stayed for 3 nights. My brother Soren drove up from Eau Claire with his wife Karen and stayed for 2. We were polite to each other. We were polite to each other in the way the children of careful Lutheran parents are polite to each other across an event of this kind, which is to say, with a great deal of formality and very little examination of what is actually moving inside the room. I did not, in those 3 days, suspect anything. I had no reason to. I had been a high school art teacher for 26 years and a retired daughter for the last 4. And the world I had been moving inside for those 30 years had been the world of small, careful Midwestern adults doing what they said they would do. I had not, in that world, encountered the kind of arrangement my brother had been engineering for the previous 14 months. I would have been, even if I had encountered it, slow to recognize it. The cardigan generation, as I have come to think of it, is slow to recognize one of its own conducting a private campaign in cardigan disguise, because the disguise is so familiar from the inside that it does not register as a disguise from the outside. The will reading was on the second Thursday after the funeral. The reading was held at the office of Marvin Iverson, who has been the Bergstrom family attorney for 31 years, and who is, in the small, careful way of long-standing small-town attorneys in the upper Midwest, both a professional acquaintance and a family friend. He had been at my father's funeral in 2003. He had been at my own divorce settlement in 2017. He had drafted my mother's original will in 1998, 3 months after my father's death, when she had been 63 years old and entirely competent, and had wanted to make sure her affairs were in order for the long widowhood she correctly anticipated. He had updated the will twice across the years, most recently in 2011, when my mother had been 73 and had wanted to add a small, specific bequest to the church and a separate small, specific bequest to Marjorie Poulsen next door. He had not, by his own account to me on the morning of the reading, drafted any further version of the will after 2011. I drove to the reading by myself because Linnea had flown back to Phoenix the previous Sunday, and Soren had said, on a Tuesday phone call, that he would meet me at Marvin's office at 10 in the morning. I arrived at 9:45. Soren was already there. He was sitting in one of the small upholstered chairs in the reception area, in a sport jacket I had not seen him wear in 20 years, his hands folded on his knees, with the small, composed posture of a man who has prepared for a meeting he has been preparing for, in some specific way, for a long time. I did not, at the time, notice this. I noticed it later, on the drive home, in the way one notices, after the fact, that the person who arrived at a difficult meeting in clothes too formal for the weather had been preparing the clothes the night before. He stood up. He hugged me, briefly, with the small, careful, one-armed hug we had been using on each other since our father's funeral. He said, "Ingrid, I hope this isn't going to be too hard on you. I know how much you loved her." I said, "Soren, it is going to be what it is." He nodded. He said, "Let me get us coffees." He went to the small Keurig in the corner of the reception area. He brought me a cup of coffee in a paper cup. The cup had a single packet of half and half on the saucer. He had remembered, I noticed when he handed it to me, the half and half. He had not, in 15 years, brought me a cup of coffee. He was being extraordinarily considerate. I should have noticed. I did not notice. The Lutheran kindness in me had its own small disguise, which is the disguise of accepting kindness without examining it. And the disguise was operational that morning, even as another version of the same disguise was being deployed against me from the chair across the reception area. Marvin Iverson came out at 10. He was a tall, slow, careful man in his late 60s, with white hair and small, gold-rimmed reading glasses, and the kind of dark gray suit that small-town Minnesota attorneys have been wearing without significant alteration since 1974. He shook Soren's hand. He shook mine. He held mine, very briefly, slightly longer than necessary, and he said, "Ingrid, before we go in, I want to tell you something." Soren, who had been turning to follow him into the inner office, paused at the doorway. Marvin said, in a careful, neutral voice, "Soren, I am going to need a moment with your sister before we begin. Please give us 5 minutes." Soren did not move for a beat. Then he said, "Of course," and he sat back down in the upholstered chair, and Marvin walked me into his inner office, and he closed the door behind us, and he gestured for me to sit down in the chair facing his desk, and he sat down across from me, and he folded his hands on the dark wood between us, and he said, very quietly, "Ingrid, I want to prepare you. There is a new will. I did not draft it. I am required by professional ethics to present it as the controlling document because it is the most recent dated will in my file. I want you to know 2 things before we begin. The first is that I do not know how the new will came to be in my file. It was delivered to me by certified mail in mid-July in a manila envelope with a brief cover letter from a notary public in Park Rapids instructing me to add it to your mother's file. I had no prior contact with the drafting party. I had no prior contact with the notary. I had no prior knowledge that your mother was contemplating a revision. The second thing I want you to know is that I have, in the 7 weeks since the document arrived in my office, formed a strong professional opinion about its provenance, and I am going to share that opinion with you, off the record, after we have concluded the formal portion of this meeting. I am sorry, Ingrid. I had hoped, when I received it, that I would not have to put it in front of you. Your mother died sooner than I had expected. There has not been time to do what I would have liked to do, which would have been to call you privately before today. I would like, in the next 5 minutes, to brace you for what is coming, so that you do not have to hear it for the first time in front of your brother. I sat with what he said for a moment. I am not, I want to be clear, a woman who panics in difficult information. I had been a high school art teacher for 26 years. I had been a daughter to a woman with Alzheimer's for 7 years. The first information had taught me not to panic. The second had taught me not to react to the first reaction of my own face. I said, Marvin, tell me what is in the new will. He told me, in 2 sentences. The new will named Soren as sole executor and as primary beneficiary. He would inherit the farmhouse, the surrounding 63 acres, and the bulk of the liquid estate. Linnea would receive $40,000 and the fishing cabin on Whitefish Lake. I would receive $5,000, the contents of my mother's sewing room, including her quilt collection, and a small, specific bequest of the contents of her cedar chest in the upstairs hallway. The rest of what I had spent 4 years assuming was coming to me, the house, the land, the liquid assets, would not. I sat with the 2 sentences for, by Marvin's later account, almost a full minute. I asked him only one question. I said, "Marvin, when was the new will dated?" He said, "July 12th of this year, 47 days before your mother's death." I asked him, very quietly, what my mother's mental state had been on July 12th. He said, "Ingrid, I am not a physician. I cannot answer that question on the basis of my own observations. But you can, and her physicians can, and on the basis of what I know about your mother's last 18 months from my own visits to the farmhouse, I would not, if I had been asked, have agreed to draft a new will for her on July 12th. I would have referred the request to a geriatric specialist for a competency evaluation first." He paused. He said, "Which is, I suspect, exactly why she did not come to me on July 12th and why the drafting party was a notary public in Park Rapids who has, by my brief investigation since I received the document, no prior professional relationship with our family, and who is, in fact, the brother-in-law of a colleague of your brother Soren's at the agricultural equipment wholesaler in Eau Claire." I sat with that piece of information for another long moment. I want to tell you what I felt in that minute, because the minute is the minute that determined every decision I made in the 7 weeks since. I did not feel rage. I felt instead a cold, clean, steady focus. The same focus I felt in 2017, when I had sat across from my divorce attorney and learned that my ex-husband had been hiding a retirement account from me for 15 years. And the focus had told me, then as now, the thing the focus always tells me, which is that there is information to gather and a sequence of decisions to make, and that the woman doing the gathering and the deciding is going to be the calmest person in the room for the duration of the gathering and the deciding. Because the calmest person in the room is the person who finishes the work. I said to Marvin, "Thank you. I am ready to go back out and bring my brother in." He looked at me for a beat. He said, "Ingrid, you are taking this better than I had expected." I said, "Marvin, I am not taking it. I am cataloging it. There is a difference. Let us proceed." The formal reading took perhaps 30 minutes. I will not walk you through it in detail. I will tell you that Soren listened to the reading of the new will with the small, composed face of a man who had known what was in it. I will tell you that he did not, at any point during the reading, look at me. I will tell you that when Marvin finished the reading and asked whether either of the beneficiaries present had any questions, Soren said, very carefully, "I would just like to say, on the record, that this was Mom's decision, and that I think she made it because she had been worried about Ingrid's stability since the divorce, and because she wanted to make sure the family land stayed in the agricultural part of the family. I know this is hard, Ingrid. I am sorry." I did not respond to him. I had decided, in the 30 minutes since Marvin's office, that I was not going to speak directly to my brother again until I had finished the gathering. I turned to Marvin instead. I said, "Marvin, thank you for your time today. I would like to receive, by the end of the week, a complete copy of the new will, a copy of the cover letter from the notary's contact information, and a copy of my mother's previous will from 2011. I would also like to request, on the record, that the estate not be formally distributed for a period of at least 60 days, pending a review of certain matters I am going to be conducting on my own." Marvin nodded. He said, "Ingrid, that is well within your rights. I will hold the estate. Soren, you understand?" Soren said, "Of course." His face had changed by the end of the sentence. The small, composed face had become, in the space of perhaps 3 seconds, the small, alert face of a man who has just understood that the meeting he prepared for is not the meeting he is now in. I stood up. I shook Marvin's hand. I walked out of the office. I did not look at my brother on my way out. He did not call after me. He did not, in the parking lot, follow me to my car. I drove home to the farmhouse in Pine River. It was, by the dashboard clock, 11:37 on a Thursday morning in late September. I had 4 years of caregiving in my hands, and a new will I was about to spend the next 7 weeks dismantling, very calmly, on the kitchen table of the house my brother believed he had taken from me, while drinking coffee out of my mother's old yellow pottery mug and writing down dates and dollar amounts in pencil in the back of an empty sketchbook I'd been planning to use, in some other version of my retirement, to teach myself watercolor. I want to tell you what I did across the next 7 weeks, because the 7 weeks are the part of this account I am proudest of, and pride is a word I do not use easily about myself. I called Marjorie Polson, the neighbor next door, on the Thursday afternoon I got home from the will reading. I told her, in 3 sentences, what had happened. Marjorie listened. She said, "Ingrid, sweetheart, come over. I will put on a pot of coffee. I have something to show you." I walked the 300 yards across the gravel road to her house. She poured me coffee in the small kitchen where my mother had drunk perhaps 4,000 cups of coffee across the previous 50 years. She went into the back bedroom. She came back with a small spiral notebook, the kind a teacher might use to keep attendance, with my mother's name written in pencil on the front cover. She said, "Ingrid, I have been keeping a log. Not because I suspected anything, because I am a woman who keeps logs. I started this in May of 2023, when your mother began to wander more often, because I wanted to be able to tell the doctor at the appointments, when I drove her to them, what I had observed. The log includes the dates of every visit your brother Soren paid to your mother across the last 2.5 years, because I noticed his car coming up the gravel road, and I noted the time, every time. The log includes a particular visit on July 12th of this year, on which Soren and your mother left the house at 11 in the morning in his car and returned at 4:37 in the afternoon. Your mother was very disoriented for the rest of the evening. I came over at 6 to bring soup, the way I had been doing on Wednesdays, and she did not recognize me. She had recognized me the previous Wednesday. She did not recognize me again, in any reliable way, between July 12th and the date of her death. I have been wondering, Ingrid, for 7 weeks, what your brother did with your mother that afternoon. I am giving you this notebook because I think you may now be able to answer my question. I want you to understand what Marjorie Polson had just done. Marjorie Polson, who is 72 years old and a retired postmaster of the Pine River Post Office, who has lived next door to my mother for 46 years, had, on her own initiative across 2.5 years, kept a contemporaneous written log of every visit my brother Soren had paid to my mother, including specific dates, specific times of arrival, and specific times of departure. She had kept this log not because she had suspected my brother of anything, but because she was a woman who had spent 34 years in the Postal Service and who understood, in her bones, that the most valuable single thing a person can do in any uncertain situation is to write down what she sees, in pencil, at the time she sees it, with the date in the margin. She had, by handing me the notebook, given me a contemporaneous written record of the most important sequence of events in this entire account. The record was, by Minnesota evidentiary standards, a contemporaneous business record kept in the ordinary course of an activity Marjorie had been engaged in, and was admissible in court. I did not, in Marjorie's kitchen, fully understand the legal weight of what she had given me. I understood, however, the human weight of it. I sat at her kitchen table, and I cried for the first time since the will reading, and Marjorie did not say anything. She refilled my coffee. She put her hand briefly on my forearm. She said, "Ingrid, there are a great many women on this gravel road who have been watching what you did for your mother for 4 years. I am only the one who happened to write it down." I drove to the office of my mother's primary care physician on the following Monday morning. The physician, Dr. Helga Knapp, is a small, careful woman in her late 50s who has been practicing family medicine in Pine River for 26 years and who had been my mother's physician for the entire 14 years since my father's death. I had been to her office with my mother perhaps 200 times in the previous 7 years. I had been at every appointment. I had taken notes at every appointment. I had picked up the prescriptions at every appointment. Dr. Knapp knew me, in the way a long-standing family physician knows the daughter who has been doing the work. I told her, in her exam room on a Monday morning, what had happened. She listened without interruption. When I had finished, she said, very quietly, "Ingrid, I'm going to do something I do not normally do. I am going to write you, this afternoon, an unsolicited letter on my professional letterhead, summarizing my clinical observations of your mother's cognitive function across the 18 months prior to her death, with particular attention to the second week of July of this year. I will state, in writing, my professional opinion regarding her capacity to enter into any legally binding agreement on July 12th of this year. I will state, also, my professional opinion that any party who knew her well, including a primary blood relative, would have been on notice of her impairment by no later than January of this year. I am going to copy the letter to her file. I am going to provide you with a sealed original. You may do with it whatever you decide. I am sorry, Ingrid. I have, in 26 years of family practice, seen this kind of thing perhaps 8 times. It is always a brother. I do not know why. I have my theories." She paused. She said, "May I ask you a question?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Did your brother ever, in the 6 months prior to your mother's death, ask you any questions about her medical decision-making capacity?" I sat with the question. I said, very slowly, "He asked me, in late May, whether I thought Mom was still capable of making major financial decisions. I told him no. I told him no in a text message, which I still have on my phone. He said, in response, that he agreed, and that we should probably be looking into a formal guardianship arrangement at some point. We never had a follow-up conversation about it. I had assumed, at the time, that he had been raising it in good faith." Dr. Knapp nodded. She said, "Ingrid, save the text message. Do not delete it. Do not alter it. Send a screenshot of it to your own email address tonight with the date stamp visible. The text message is, by my professional reading, a fairly significant piece of evidence in any future legal proceeding." Your brother put on the record, 6 weeks before the new will was drafted, his own opinion that your mother was not capable of major financial decisions. He then took her, 6 weeks later, to a notary public in Park Rapids and had her sign a major financial decision. That is not a behavior an honest party engages in. I do not have to be a lawyer to recognize it. I am only a family physician, but I have, in 26 years, learned to recognize it. And your brother behaved exactly the way the men who do this thing behave. I am sorry. I drove home from Dr. Knapp's office with an envelope in the passenger seat of my car that contained a sealed letter from a primary care physician with 26 years of practice in a small Minnesota town, stating in clinical language that my mother had not had the capacity on July 12th of this year to sign a will, and that any blood relative who had been visiting her regularly would have known. I made a turn at the corner of Highway 371 and County Road 11. I pulled into the gravel lot of the Pine River Public Library. I sat in the car for perhaps 15 minutes. I thought about my brother Soren. I thought about the small, composed face he had worn into Marvin Iverson's office on a Thursday morning 2 weeks earlier. I thought about the part-time job he had once recommended in 2023. I thought about the small, careful, steady, decade-long campaign of small, careful, steady erosions of credit. The kind of campaign a brother conducts when he has decided, in the privacy of his own head, that his sister's labor on behalf of their mother is the recreation of a woman with nothing else to do. I sat in the car. I did not cry. I had cried in Marjorie's kitchen. I was done crying. I started the car. I drove the rest of the way home. I want to compress what happened across the next 6 weeks, because I am aware that I have been telling this account at length, and there is a finite number of details a listener can hold across an evening. I am going to tell you what I did in a short list, because what I did is the part I would like you to remember. I went to my mother's bank in Pine River the following Wednesday morning. I requested a complete 18-month statement of all transactions on my mother's checking account, savings account, and the small annuity my father had left her. I was on the accounts as a co-signer. I had been on them since 2021. I had not, in the 4 years I had been on them, ever pulled a full statement, because I had not had a reason to. The statements revealed 3 things. The first was that my mother had been paying, since March of 2023, a monthly invoice of $3,400 to an LLC called Bergstrom Family Care Services, a Minnesota limited liability company with a registered address at a UPS store in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. The LLC had been incorporated in February of 2023 by my brother, Soren. The LLC had, across 30 months, drawn $102,000 out of my mother's accounts for, the invoices indicated, professional care management services and care coordination. There were no actual services. I am the only person in this account who provided care management. The second was that the monthly draws had been authorized by my brother Soren in his capacity as a co-signer on the accounts, which he had quietly added himself to in March of 2023, 2 weeks after he had asked me whether retirement could be isolating. I had not noticed the addition because I had not been reviewing the signature card. I had been busy giving my mother her medication on schedule. The third was that the new will had, by its specific language, attempted to indemnify Soren against any claim arising from the LLC, on the theory that the LLC's services had been authorized by my mother in writing in February of 2023. The piece of paper in February of 2023 on which my mother had authorized the LLC was in Marvin Iverson's file, included with the new will. It was, by my best reading of the handwriting, a piece of paper my mother could not have produced in February of 2023. By February of 2023, my mother could not have written her own name in cursive in a continuous flow without rest. The signature on the authorization was, by the standard of my own 4 years of handling her checks, the signature of a woman whose hand had been guided. I will tell you what I did with these 3 pieces of information. I retained an attorney in Brainerd named Astrid Halverson, who is unrelated to my mother despite the first name. She had been recommended to me by Dr. Knapp. She had been practicing elder law and estate litigation in central Minnesota for 22 years. She took the case on a contingency arrangement. She told me, in our first meeting, that she had seen this kind of thing perhaps 30 times in 22 years, and that she had a particular small, careful, Lutheran, Wisconsin satisfaction in handling it, because she had, herself, been the daughter who had taken care of an aging father in the 1990s, and the experience had decided the rest of her professional career for her. She said, "Ingrid, we are going to do this slowly. We are going to do this thoroughly. We are not going to file in haste. We are going to take 8 weeks to assemble the record. We are then going to file 3 actions at the same time. 1. A will contest, on the grounds of incapacity, undue influence, and improper execution. 2. A separate civil action against your brother for breach of fiduciary duty and conversion of estate funds. 3. A report to the Minnesota Attorney General's Office, Vulnerable Adult Exploitation Unit, which is required by statute when the facts rise to a certain threshold, which the facts you have already given me clearly do. We are going to send your brother and his attorney a single piece of correspondence, 60 days from today, in which we are going to lay out the evidence we have assembled, and we are going to give him 48 hours to make a settlement offer that I will draft for him to sign. The settlement offer will include, at a minimum, the formal withdrawal of the new will, the formal acknowledgement that the prior will from 2011 is the controlling document, the return of all funds drawn through the LLC, plus interest, plus our attorney's fees, plus a personal letter of acknowledgement to you. If he refuses, we will file. The filing will be a matter of public record in our county. The local press, which is the small weekly paper in Pine River, has, by my understanding of the local press, a particular appetite for elder exploitation cases involving an out-of-county sibling. I am not going to threaten your brother with the press. I am going to allow your brother to threaten himself with the press by understanding on his own what filing will mean. Do you have any questions, Ingrid? I said, Astrid, I have one. Will my sister Linnea need to choose a side? Astrid said, Ingrid, yes, she will. She does not have to choose now. She will have to choose by the time we send the 60-day letter. I would suggest you call her this week. I called my sister Linnea on the following Saturday morning. I told her, in the same flat, factual, short sentences I'd used with Marjorie and Dr. Knapp and Astrid Halverson, what had happened. Linnea listened. She did not interrupt. When I had finished, she was quiet on the line for a long moment. Then she said, Ingrid, may I tell you something? May I tell you something I have not told anybody else in our family? I said, yes. She said, I have not been a good sister to you across the last 7 years. I have known I have not been a good sister. I have, in the privacy of my own head in Phoenix, watched you do for our mother what I had assumed, on the basis of nothing, was the kind of thing you had always wanted to do. I had told myself a story, Ingrid. I had told myself that you were the closer of us to her, and that you had the time, and that the 4 years had been a thing you had wanted, and that my contribution from Phoenix had been the financial part. The financial part. I have, in the last year, started sending you Christmas cards with a check in them, because Trent and I are doing well, and because I had not understood that the checks were, themselves, a small admission of something I had not been admitting. I did not know about the LLC. I did not know about the will. I am sorry, Ingrid. I have known for a long time that Soren is who Soren is. I had not known he had decided to be Soren about this. I want you to know one thing. I am on your side. I am on your side completely. I am going to fly up next weekend. I will sit in any meeting with the attorney that you ask me to sit in. I will testify in any proceeding to anything I have observed, including the things I have observed about Soren that I have not previously been willing to put on the record. I want you to know that the $4,000 in the new will, if it ever comes to me, is going directly to you. I am not going to keep a dollar of it. I am not going to accept the cabin on Whitefish Lake. The cabin should have gone, on Mom's actual preferences as she expressed them to me in the late summer of 2017, to the church. I am going to tell Mom's pastor this when I am up next weekend. I am sorry, Ingrid. I have a great deal to atone for on my end of this. I am going to start atoning now. I sat with what my sister said for a long moment. I had not, in 7 weeks, allowed myself to expect this. I had been preparing myself for the possibility that Linnea would side with Soren, on the grounds that Linnea had not been close to either of us in any of our adult lives, and that her loyalty was easy for Soren to engineer. I had been preparing myself, in particular, for the possibility that Linnea would believe, the way Soren had been quietly suggesting to her for over a year, that I had been burning out, and that the new will was the kindness of a mother trying to spare her overworked daughter from further obligation. I had not been preparing myself for the possibility that my sister was a 40-year-old woman in her own right, who had been doing her own slow, careful, private accounting in Phoenix across the 7 years of our mother's decline, and who had, in the quiet of her own dermatology office on certain afternoons of certain weeks, arrived at conclusions about our family that she had not been ready to share until I had been ready to ask her to. I said, "Linnea, thank you. I am going to need you up next weekend. I am going to need you in the meeting with Astrid Halverson on the Friday afternoon. I am going to need you with me when we send the letter to Soren." She said, "Ingrid, I will be there." The letter to Soren went on a Tuesday in early November. Astrid Halverson drafted it across a long, careful afternoon in her Brainerd office, with Linnea sitting in one of the upholstered chairs and me sitting in the other, both of us reading every paragraph as Astrid completed it, both of us approving every word before it went on to the final page. The letter was 12 pages long. The letter set out, in flat, short, factual sentences, the timeline of Soren's visits across the previous 30 months, the dates and amounts of every LLC draw, the medical opinion of Dr. Helda Knapp, the contemporaneous log of Marjorie Polson, the May text message in which Soren had himself acknowledged our mother's incapacity, the relationship between the Park Rapids notary and Soren's colleague at the agricultural equipment wholesaler, and the legal analysis under Minnesota law of each of the 4 grounds we intended to assert. The letter gave Soren 48 hours to respond with a settlement offer matching the terms Astrid had pre-drafted on a separate enclosed page. The letter did not, in any sentence, raise its voice. The letter was the calmest 12 pages of factual recitation I have ever read. The letter was, in its calmness, more terrifying than anything any of us could have shouted into a telephone, because the calmness was the calmness of a Lutheran attorney from central Minnesota who had been preparing this kind of letter for 22 years, and who was, in the small, careful way of the women who handle these cases, very good at her job. The letter went certified mail. The return receipt arrived on the following Thursday morning. The 48-hour clock began to run from the moment Soren signed for the envelope at his office in Eau Claire at 10:46 on a Thursday in the second week of November. Soren's attorney, a man in Eau Claire named Gerald Steinmuller, called Astrid Halverson at 4:18 on the Friday afternoon, 28 hours and 32 minutes after the receipt. Steinmuller had, by Astrid's later account to me, sounded both tired and resigned. He had told Astrid that his client was prepared to sign the settlement offer with 3 minor modifications, which Astrid told me later were all immaterial face-saving adjustments she had built into the language specifically to give Soren the opportunity to feel he had negotiated something. The signed settlement arrived in Astrid's office on the following Monday morning. The new will was formally withdrawn. The 2011 will became the controlling document. Soren returned, by certified check, the entire $102,000 drawn through the LLC, plus interest, plus Astrid's fees of $41,000. The LLC was formally dissolved on the following Wednesday with the Minnesota Secretary of State. Soren signed a personal letter drafted by Astrid and reviewed by Linnea and me, in which he acknowledged, in writing, in 5 short sentences, that he had drafted the new will without our mother's competent consent, that he had drawn funds from the estate without authorization, that he had misrepresented our mother's care arrangements to multiple parties, including our sister Linnea, and that he was, in the language of the letter, profoundly sorry. He has not, in the 11 weeks since signing the letter, spoken to me directly. He has not, in the same 11 weeks, written to me directly. I have not, in the same 11 weeks, expected him to. The settlement, on Astrid's careful advice, did not require any further communication. The settlement required only that he sign what we had drafted and that he wire what we had calculated. He did both, on the same Monday morning by noon. I have not seen my brother since. I want to tell you what I have done in the 11 weeks since the settlement, because the 11 weeks are the part of this account I think about most often now. I have kept the house in Pine River, although I am not certain I will keep it forever. It is a large, old farmhouse on 63 acres of land that does not, in the practical operating sense of the word, need a 60-year-old retired art teacher rattling around inside it. I have been considering, very carefully, whether to sell the house and the land and to move to a smaller place in Brainerd or in Bemidji, somewhere closer to a community I can be part of. The decision is not, on Astrid Halverson's careful advice, one I should make quickly, because the year following the death of a parent is not a year in which any of us make our best property decisions. I have given myself until next August. If by next August I have decided to sell, I will sell. If by next August I have decided to stay, I will stay. The acreage is going into a quiet, small conservation arrangement with a local land trust, regardless of which decision I make, so that whoever buys the house, if I do sell it, will buy a house and a homestead lot, and not a development opportunity. My mother would have liked this. The conservation easement was, in fact, something my mother had been talking about doing in 2017, 8 years ago, in the period before her diagnosis, when she had been 79 and entirely clear-headed and had been thinking about her own legacy. I have completed, on her behalf, a piece of paperwork she did not get the chance to complete on her own. It is a small thing. It feels, in some small, careful way, like the only piece of executor's work I have done that has actually been the work of being an executor of her wishes, rather than the work of being a litigant for my own interests. I have, in the same 11 weeks, gone back to my studio art. I had not painted in 4 years. The 4 years of caregiving had been the 4 years of not painting, because the 4 years of caregiving had been the 4 years of not having any small, careful, private interior life of my own. And my painting is the interior life. I have, in the last 6 weeks, completed 3 small watercolors of the south field of the farmhouse, in the slow, careful way I used to paint before I taught studio art for 26 years and stopped having time. I have not shown the watercolors to anyone. I am not, in any sense available to me, painting them for anyone. I am painting them instead on a slow, careful schedule of 3 afternoons a week in the room my mother used as her sewing room, because the sewing room is the room with the best light in the house, and because the sewing room is the room I was bequeathed in the new will. And I have decided, with a small, private, dry Lutheran humor, that my brother accidentally gave me, in the new will, the only piece of the house I actually needed in order to begin my second career. I have, in the same 11 weeks, become extraordinarily close to Marjorie Poulsen. We have coffee together on Wednesday mornings in her kitchen, in a small, careful, weekly ritual we have established without ever discussing it. We have been to a quilting class in Brainerd together on 3 Saturday afternoons. We have, twice now, driven the 90 miles to the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis on a Saturday for a special exhibition, and we have had lunch afterward at a small restaurant Marjorie remembered from a trip she had taken with her late husband in 1993. Marjorie has, on the basis of nothing other than her own steady decision, become the person whose phone call I take first in the morning and whose phone call I take last at night. She is 72. She is 12 years older than me. She is also, in the slow, careful way certain neighbors become this, the closest thing I have, in central Minnesota, to a sister. My actual sister, Linnea, in Phoenix, has called me every Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock Central Time, without fail, for 11 weeks, and we have talked for an hour each time, in the slow, careful way of 2 adult sisters who have decided, very late in their lives, to actually become sisters. The 2 relationships have, between them, replaced the relationship I no longer have with my brother, in the same way that a transplanted root system places a damaged one in a careful old orchard. The replacement is not the same as the original. The replacement is, in some careful ways, better. The relationships I have now did not require me to spend 4 decades pretending the original was fine. I want to tell you what I have learned, although I am only 60 years old. And the lesson is, as I have come to phrase it for myself, the lesson of one particular Minnesota family across one particular generation of women. And I am cautious about pretending it generalizes. I am going to offer it anyway, because if you have stayed with me this long, I think you may have stayed because you needed it. The work of caring for an aging parent is, in our economy and in our culture, the most undervalued labor performed by any working adult in the modern world. The work is undervalued because it is performed, in nearly every case, by women, in the privacy of their own homes, on no salary, on no recognized schedule, with no professional title, and with no contemporaneous administrative record. The absence of the salary, the title, and the record is taken by every other adult in the family of the woman doing the work to mean that the work is not, in the technical sense, work. It is taken to mean, instead, that the woman doing the work has been engaged in something more like a long emotional indulgence, a kind of voluntary extended visit, a daughterly hobby. The men in the family, in particular, are very gifted at this reframing, because the reframing is the reframing that permits the men in the family to not have to do the work themselves. Once a piece of labor has been reframed as a hobby, the woman doing the labor has, by the family's internal logic, no claim to any compensation for it in any currency. She has no claim to financial compensation because hobbies are not paid. She has no claim to inheritance compensation because inheritance is for the heirs of the family, not for the family's employees, and a hobbyist is not even an employee. She has no claim to gratitude because hobbies are their own reward. The reframing is, in this small, careful way, total. The reframing erases the woman's labor while she is still performing it, in real time, in the kitchen of the very parent she is taking care of. The reframing is the foundation on which every will revision of the kind my brother Soren conducted in July of this year is built. He did not, on July 12th, sit down at a notary's office in Park Rapids and decide to disinherit me. He had, by July 12th, been deciding it for 4 years, in the small, careful internal accounting of a man who had been telling himself, across 4 years, that his sister's full-time presence in their mother's house had been a hobby, and that the family's actual assets, the farmhouse and the land and the liquid estate, were therefore his to allocate, because the actual contributing son in the family was him. He was, by his own internal accounting, not stealing anything. He was, by his own internal accounting, claiming what was already his. The Park Rapids notary office was a clerical exercise. The reframing had been doing the work for years. I want to tell you, finally, the piece of information I promised you at the top of this account. The piece of information is this. If you are, at this hour, a woman who is doing the work of caring for an aging parent in the small, invisible, private way I have been describing, please do not do what I did. Please do not believe, the way I believed, that the work will be honored at the end by the small, careful adult accounting of your siblings. Please do not assume, the way I assumed, that the legal documents your parents signed 20 years ago will be the legal documents that govern the eventual settlement of the estate. Please do not, in particular, neglect to check the signature cards on your parents' bank accounts every quarter, on the practical grounds that any sibling can quietly add himself as a co-signer in 15 minutes at any branch. And the bank is not going to call you to ask whether the addition is fine with you. Please do, instead, the following 4 things. 1. Request a copy of your parents' current will from the parent's attorney every 6 months on a standing arrangement, so that any modification will be visible to you within 6 months of its execution, rather than after the funeral. 2. Request quarterly statements of all of your parents' accounts directly from the bank, in your own name, with a signed authorization from your parent, obtained while your parent is still competent, so that you have an independent line of sight on the cash flow that does not depend on any other family member's transparency. 3. Keep your own contemporaneous written log of every visit any sibling pays to the parent, including dates, times, and any decisions discussed, on the model of the log Marjorie Polson kept for me without my asking her to. 4. Identify, while your parent is still competent, the family physician's policy on capacity evaluations, and confirm in writing with the physician that the physician's records will be made available to you in the event of any later dispute. Those 4 small, careful clerical habits, performed consistently across the years of the caregiving, would have saved me $102,000 in stolen funds, 14 months of fraudulent LLC operations, the 4-year insult of being told my labor had been a hobby, and the 7 weeks of legal work it took to undo what my brother engineered in a single afternoon in Park Rapids. The 4 habits are, in the end, the small, careful Lutheran clerical wall I had not known I needed to build until the wall was already 3 feet shorter than it had needed to be. Build the wall. Build it from the first week. Build it whether you trust your siblings or not. The siblings you trust are the siblings most likely to do this thing, because the siblings you do not trust will not have access to the parent. The wall is not, in the end, a wall against the siblings. The wall is, in the end, the small, careful record of your own labor, so that the labor cannot be reframed as a hobby in your absence. I am, as I record this account, in the front room of the farmhouse in Pine River, in the late October light, with the wood stove on a low burn against the small, early cold of a Minnesota autumn. Marjorie Polson is coming over at 6 to walk with me down the gravel road to the south field, the way we have been walking on Tuesday and Thursday evenings since the first week of October. My sister Linnea is going to call me at 4 Central Time on Sunday, the way she has been calling for 11 weeks now. The watercolors of the south field are stacked in the sewing room, the only room of the house my brother Soren had decided I was entitled to inherit, which has, in the small, dry Lutheran irony I have come to find some private amusement in, become the entire physical and emotional center of the second half of my life. The land trust paperwork for the conservation easement is on the kitchen table. The new will was, by the formal entry on the Hubbard County records on the second Monday of December, withdrawn from probate. The 2011 will, the one my mother signed when she was 73 and entirely clear, is the controlling document. The estate has, by the close of December, been formally distributed in accordance with my mother's actual wishes. Linnea has, true to her word, redirected her $40,000 to me. I have, in turn, redirected $20,000 to the small Lutheran church on First and Birch, in a small, specific fund my mother had been talking about in 2017 for the church's heating system, and $10,000 to the Pine River Public Library, on no particular instruction from anyone, because I had decided, very privately, that the public library is the kind of institution that catches the kind of woman my mother was when there is no longer anyone who knows her. The remaining $10,000 I have kept in a small account against the long, careful, slow project of rebuilding a life I had not, in 4 years, had any time to plan for. My name is Ingrid Bergstrom. I am 60 years old. I am a retired studio art teacher in central Minnesota. I am the second daughter, by my own accounting, of a careful Lutheran woman named Astrid Bergstrom, who died in late August of natural causes in the 4-poster bed she was born in. I am, by every measure I now have available, in the strongest position of my adult life. Although the strength is not, in the simple sense of the word, the strength of having won anything. The strength is, instead, the slow, careful Lutheran clerical strength of a woman who built a record in pencil at her kitchen table across 7 weeks of an autumn she had not asked for, in the company of 3 other careful Midwestern women who had been building their own records in their own ways for years, and who had been, in some private backroom sense of the word, waiting for me to ask for help, so that the records could finally come out of their respective notebooks and quilting boxes and clinical files and dermatology offices and become, on the long, careful table of an estate attorney in Brainerd, the wall my brother could not climb. The wall held. The wall holds. I am sitting inside the wall now, in the October light, with the wood stove ticking and the late afternoon settling into evening. And the work, finally, and for the first time in my adult life, is mine. Thank you for being in the room. Thank you for staying to the end. If this account has been useful to you, or if you know somebody for whom it might be useful, please share it. Drop a comment, please, and tell me, if you would, what your own 4 small clerical habits have been across the years of your own caregiving. I read the comments. I have, in the last week, started a small spiral notebook in pencil for the names of the women who write in, because I want to know who you are. I will see you in the next account.